On July 20, 1969, 600 million people held their breath as a man stepped onto another world for the first time in history. The Apollo program began after President Kennedy's 1961 promise to land a man on the moon before the decade was out. It was a direct response to the Soviet Union's early lead in space, including the first satellite and the first human in orbit. NASA spent $25 billion and employed 400,000 people to make the moon landing possible. The Saturn V rocket that launched Apollo 11 remains the most powerful machine ever built by human hands. Standing over 100 meters tall, it generated 34 million newtons of thrust at liftoff. Inside the tiny command module were 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Armstrong commanded the mission, Aldrin would join him on the surface, and Collins would orbit alone above. The journey to the moon took 3 days, covering roughly 380,000 kilometers of empty space. On July 20th, the lunar module named Eagle separated and began its perilous descent toward the surface. Alarms blared in the final minutes as onboard computers became overloaded with data during the landing sequence. Armstrong took manual control, guiding the module past a boulder field to find a safer landing spot. With only seconds of fuel remaining, the Eagle touched down on the Sea of Tranquility. Armstrong's words to Houston were simple: "The Eagle has landed." 6.5 hours later, Armstrong opened the hatch and climbed down the ladder. As his boot touched the dust, he spoke words that would echo through history: "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Aldrin followed 19 minutes later, describing the view as magnificent desolation. The 2 astronauts spent 2.5 hours walking on the surface, collecting samples, and setting up experiments. They planted an American flag, stiffened with wire since there is no wind on the moon to make it wave. They left behind a plaque reading, "We came in peace for all mankind." A seismometer they installed detected moonquakes for years after the astronauts departed. They also left a retroreflector that scientists still use today to measure the exact distance to the moon with lasers. Meanwhile, Michael Collins orbited alone above, becoming the most isolated human being in history during radio blackouts. For 48 minutes each orbit, he lost all contact with Earth as he passed behind the moon. Collins later said he did not feel lonely, but rather awareness, satisfaction, and even exultation. After 21 hours on the surface, Armstrong and Aldrin lifted off in the ascent stage to rejoin Collins. The descent stage remained behind, its base still standing on the Sea of Tranquility to this day. The journey home took 3 more days, ending with a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. The astronauts were placed in quarantine for 18 days in case they carried unknown lunar microbes. They emerged as global heroes, greeted by ticker tape parades in cities around the world. In total, 12 humans have walked on the moon across 6 Apollo missions between 1969 and 1972. Apollo 11 alone brought back 22 kilograms of lunar rock and soil samples for scientific study. These samples proved the moon formed from debris after a Mars-sized object struck the early Earth. The onboard guidance computer had less processing power than a modern calculator. Yet it successfully navigated a spacecraft across 250,000 miles with remarkable precision. The Apollo program cost the equivalent of over $150 billion in today's money. At its peak, Apollo consumed over 4% of the entire United States federal budget. No human has traveled beyond low Earth orbit since the last Apollo mission left the moon in 1972. NASA's Artemis program now aims to return humans to the moon, this time to stay permanently. Artemis plans to land the first woman and the first person of color on the lunar surface. Unlike Apollo's brief visits, Artemis aims to build a sustainable base near the moon's south pole. Water ice discovered in permanently shadowed craters could supply future astronauts with fuel and oxygen. The moon may become a stepping stone for the much longer journey humanity hopes to make to Mars. Apollo 11 proved that with enough will, humans could reach beyond their home planet. Neil Armstrong once said the moon landing was the beginning of a new age, not the end of an old one. 50 years later, humanity is once again looking up, preparing to finish what Apollo started.